Hi, I'm Quinn and I'm autistic. Welcome to Autistic. What's it like to be an undiagnosed autist? This has been an interesting question for me to answer. I first discovered I was autistic in my teens when very little information was available and the diagnosis so rare that there wasn't much chance of me meeting another diagnosed autist. The world is very different now. Whilst we still have a long way to go, there is more awareness of autism than back then. In the mid-1980s, almost no one had heard of it, but since the arrival of the internet and some updates to the diagnostic manuals, almost everyone is aware of autism now on some level. They may have a distorted and unhelpful view of what it is, which is why advocates like myself are kept very busy, but at least they know of its existence and have some idea that it has something to do with how we interact with the world. The public perception of autistic people is largely inaccurate and mired in deficit, making it a huge barrier to overcome. It will take years to finally change it, and until that happens, newly identified autists will always face an uphill battle. That's post-identification though. We're here to talk about the before, not the after. I've talked to dozens of people in getting to this point and gathered additional stories from social media and other creators to map out the life of two quite different, fictional but representative undiagnosed autists. While some of it will resonate with a few neurotypical people and even more so with people who aren't autistic but are neurodivergent in some other way, all of the experiences I'll describe have been related over and again by people who now know with certainty that they are autistic. This isn't a guide to self-identification though. If you can relate to everything I say, it doesn't mean you're necessarily autistic. There may be other explanations too. But even so, if you do find yourself nodding along with this video thinking it all sounds too familiar, it's certainly something you might want to consider. There's one big problem I faced in constructing these stories though. We know that a great deal of the behaviours associated with autism are directly related to stress and trauma. An autistic life in the contemporary world is almost always beset with aggravation, negative bias and exclusion, which contributes massively to those stress reactions. But being autistic isn't the only thing which marginalises most of us. Intersectionality plays its part too. Women and girls have a harder time getting diagnosed and still suffer from the inequalities foisted upon them by a largely misogynistic world. Trans and non-binary people have come under increasing levels of scrutiny and prejudice, fuelled by a succession of high-profile social media trolls and dubious decisions from government. Great strides have been made in combating homophobia, yet it still rears its ugly head in the West and is even worse in some countries where being gay is still considered a crime. And to cap it all, we still live in a world where having any skin colour other than white is at the very least a disadvantage, at worst a risk to life and freedom. Despite a skewed diagnostic process, there is no gender or racial divide in autism, and we already know that a higher proportion of autists identify as trans or non-binary than in non-autistic people. Whatever our biological sex at birth, our gender identity, our sexuality, or the colour of our skin, the chances of us being born with an autistic mind are no different, but our chances of it being recognised couldn't be further apart. If I'm to represent the typical life of an undiagnosed autistic with any degree of accuracy, I have to eliminate all those other factors, those intersectionalities that could make those lives even more difficult. All other potential prejudices and social barriers have to be removed. To paint a picture of how being autistic can be evident in someone's life without anything else clouding our view, we have to make our characters part of the most privileged and overrepresented group in modern society. There will have to be white, heterosexual, cisgender, middle-class males. It's the only way to eliminate any other sources of prejudice and willful mistreatment. If all other biases and disadvantages are removed, only autism is left. Now, please remember that this project is specifically about autists who go undetected until adulthood. So those of us who display more obvious differences or have additional disabilities are unlikely to be represented. A child who doesn't speak or exhibits specific challenging behaviours is more than likely to receive some sort of diagnosis before they hit 18, even if it isn't the right one. All undiagnosed autists have slipped the net, been protected by misguided parents, or simply masked their autistic traits well enough to avoid attracting too much attention. We'll call our undiagnosed autists Lenny and Tom. Lenny was a bright kid. He started reading shortly after he started talking, which made his mum very proud. When he got to school, though, his ability to read singled him out from the other kids. He'd sit there bored during reading and comprehension lessons, and everyone could see. Even amongst 5-year-olds, he stood out as different, and as usually happens when someone stands out from the crowd, he was bullied. Lenny could never understand it. He'd always been told that academic prowess was a good thing, that knowledge was important and to be respected. But at school he was bullied by his peers and pushed into activities he couldn't make sense of by the staff. All he wanted to do was read and draw and learn, but they had other ideas. He was only allowed to read what he was given at school, and they never gave him enough time to finish his drawings. His mother even got called into the school for letting him read books written for adults, and blamed her lack of discipline for his unwillingness to conform. It took him 2 years to make a friend at school, but for a while Lenny and Steve were inseparable. They did everything together, and the summer holiday they spent together was more fun than Lenny had ever had. Steve was the first child he'd met that made sense to him. They both read the same kind of books, loved making up stories together, and enjoyed the same games. Come September, though, the news that Steve's parents were moving away shattered his confidence. It had taken him so long to make just one friend. How would he find another? Tom was quite slow to start speaking. His parents took him to the doctor when he was 3, thinking there might be something wrong with his vocal cords, or maybe he was deaf. The doctor gave him a clean bill of health, but offered to refer him to investigate other possibilities. He even mentioned that autistic children sometimes were slow to start speaking or may never speak at all, but they didn't want to go down that route. They didn't want Tom getting a label that might hold him back. He finally started speaking at about 4 years old. He'd occasionally stop talking for an hour or two, sometimes a few days, but he'd always start again in the end. When school started, Tom enjoyed his first few months. He liked being around other kids and took great pleasure in learning the alphabet song. He didn't get on so well with reading, though. It wasn't that he couldn't read, it was that he couldn't concentrate in the classroom. The teachers thought he was being awkward, and the other kids called him stupid. He stood out from the crowd, and he was bullied too. By the time the boys were age 7, both Lenny and Tom's parents were frustrated by things their boys did that they couldn't quite understand. Several times, Lenny's mum ran out of the house in a panic, thinking he'd run away from home. Fraught hours would pass before he would saunter back in and wouldn't tell them where he'd been. He had tried telling them once that he couldn't stand it when Mum and Dad were shouting at his little brother, so he ran. But when he told them, they shouted at him too, which was worse. So now he would leave the house when he could, or sit at the end of the garden, behind the shed out of sight from the house, until everything went quiet. His parents put locks on all the doors and windows, high fences around the garden, but he'd still occasionally escape. They didn't make the connection between their own behaviour and his disappearances, and they made it increasingly difficult for him to get away from their noise. So Lenny would go to his room and retreat into his books and his drawings, creating elaborate fantasy worlds and characters that he shared imaginary adventures with when the shouting outside his room got too much. Tom's parents were at their wits' end over the violent outbursts he kept having. Sometimes they'd ask him to do something and he'd erupt in fury, screaming obscenities at them and hurling things across the room. They had no idea why he did it or what he was trying to achieve, but they weren't going to stand for it. At first, they blamed his friends, so they spoke to the kids' parents and stopped them from hanging out with Tom. They tried punishment and reward. They put up boards on the kitchen wall and awarded him gold stars for good behaviour, promising him a trip to Disneyland once he filled up his chart. They didn't know that the idea of Disneyland terrified him. He loved Disney cartoons and characters, but the idea of being around the crowds and noise, the travelling it involved, not to mention the thought of being surrounded by creepy 7-foot-tall versions of characters he knew were nothing more than drawings? Nah, that wasn't for him. They tried increasingly harsh punishments too, but nothing seemed to stop his tantrums. Tom's aunt suggested they might see a therapist of some sort, but his father wouldn't have any of it. There was nothing wrong with any son of his. He was just badly behaved, and he was sure it was either the school putting ideas into his head or another bad crowd he'd fallen in with. Despite the speech problem in his early years, Tom had been such a sweet, affectionate kid until he started school, so it must have something to do with it. When Lenny and Tom were both 11, they moved to secondary school. And that's where we're going to leave it for this week. Next week, I'll be continuing the stories of both boys through the rest of their education and into early adulthood. But for now, thank you for watching. Autistic is growing fast, but I still need your likes, subscriptions, comments and shares to keep reaching new people and helping them understand the realities of autistic life and experience. The channel wouldn't be possible without the patrons whose generous support on Patreon helps to finance future content, and you can also help out by treating yourself to exclusive merch from the Autistic TeePublic shop. Links to both are in the description.